Restaurant refuses to seat woman in Biden-Harris hat. Then finds out she's a federal judge. It was a crisp Saturday evening at the Marina Bistro, the city's most exclusive fine dining establishment. The clink of crystal glasses and the soft hum of polite conversation filled the room. Waiters in sharp uniforms glided between tables, balancing trays laden with gourmet dishes. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room, their light reflecting off gold-plated menus. Every detail spoke of luxury, the kind that separated the elite from everyone else. Amidst this polished setting, Trevor Daniels, the restaurant's manager, scanned the room with an eagle eye. Known for his perfectionism and sharp tongue, Trevor prided himself on maintaining the Marina's reputation as the pinnacle of exclusivity. No mistake went unnoticed under his watch, and no guest escaped his scrutiny. As Trevor paced near the hostess stand, his gaze landed on something, or rather, someone, that made his carefully curated world grind to a halt. A boy, no older than 17, stood awkwardly just outside the entrance. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and a tattered backpack hung from his shoulder. The boy shifted nervously, his sneakers scuffing against the marble floor as he peeked inside. Trevor's lip curled in disdain. The boy didn't belong here. That much was obvious. This wasn't a fast food joint. It was the Marina. Its clientele consisted of CEOs, socialites, and celebrities, not kids like him. "Excuse me? Can I help you?" Trevor called out, his tone already edged with irritation. The boy flinched slightly at the sharpness in Trevor's voice but stepped forward hesitantly. Hi, he began, his voice soft and uncertain. "I was wondering if I could get something to eat?" Trevor blinked, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of the question. "This is a fine dining establishment," he said curtly. "We don't serve burgers and fries." I know," the boy stammered, clutching the strap of his backpack tightly. I've heard this place is really nice and I thought maybe..." Trevor cut him off with a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You thought what exactly? That you'd waltz in here without a reservation, dressed like that?" He gestured pointedly to the boy's clothes, his sneer growing wider. The boy's cheeks flushed a deep red, but he didn't back away. "I have money," he said quickly, pulling a crumpled bill and a few coins from his pocket. I haven't eaten in a while, and I thought..." "This?" Trevor interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt as he eyed the boy's meager offering. "That won't even cover the tip for one of our waiters." Nearby, a couple seated by the window glanced over, their conversation faltering as they noticed the commotion. A waiter paused mid-step, his tray balanced precariously as he watched the scene unfold. The room's atmosphere shifted, the quiet murmur of conversation giving way to whispers and curious stares. "Please," the boy said, his voice cracking slightly. "I won't stay long. I just need..." "What you need," Trevor snapped, stepping closer, "is to leave. This is the Marina, not a soup kitchen." The boy flinched as if struck, but still he didn't retreat. "I'm not looking for charity," he said softly. "I can pay." Trevor held up a hand, cutting him off. "You can't even afford the breadbasket, let alone a meal. And even if you could, we have standards here. Standards that you clearly don't meet." The whispers grew louder now, rippling through the dining room like a wave. Some guests turned fully in their seats, their gazes bouncing between Trevor and the boy like spectators at a tennis match. The tension in the room was palpable, heavy, and unrelenting. The boy took a step back, his hand twitching slightly at his side. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the stares of the diners, their faces a mixture of curiosity, pity, and disdain. His shoulders slumped, but he managed to meet Trevor's eyes one last time. "I just wanted a chance," he said quietly. Trevor snorted, shaking his head. "Well, you're not getting one here. Now, unless you want me to call security, I suggest you take your business elsewhere." The boy hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but then he glanced down at the crumpled bill in his hand and seemed to deflate entirely. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, He turned and walked toward the door. Trevor watched him go, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the whispers from the crowd continued, though no one made a move to intervene. As the boy reached the door, he paused, his hand resting on the frame. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. His eyes landed on Trevor, and for a brief moment, they held a flicker of something. Disappointment, maybe, or quiet determination. Then he stepped outside, the door swinging shut behind him. The restaurant fell silent for a beat, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Then, slowly, the chatter resumed, the diners returning to their meals and conversations as though nothing had happened. The moment was over, or so they thought. Trevor returned to his post by the hostess stand, his expression smug. He had done his job after all. He had protected the integrity of the marina. But deep down, a strange unease began to creep in, a nagging sensation that he couldn't quite shake. He brushed it off, telling himself that he had acted appropriately. Rules were rules, and the boy had no business being there. Unbeknownst to Trevor, however, the boy hadn't gone far. Standing just outside the restaurant, his hand still clutching the strap of his backpack, he took a deep breath and reached for his phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed a number, and when the call connected, his voice was soft but steady. "It's me," he said. "I'm at the restaurant. They wouldn't let me in." The person on the other end said something inaudible, and the boy nodded, his lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Yeah," he said. "I think it's time." Inside the restaurant, Trevor continued his patrol, unaware of the storm that was about to descend. The restaurant's hum had returned, but the air felt heavier now, like a ripple in the calm surface of a lake after a stone had been thrown. Trevor stood near the hostess stand, his eyes scanning the room for any further disturbances. He could still feel the weight of the boy's gaze from moments earlier, lingering like an unwelcome guest in his thoughts. It unsettled him, though he would never admit it. Behind him, one of the waiters, Aaron, leaned closer to another staff member, his voice a low whisper. "That was harsh, don't you think?" The kid didn't seem like he was here to cause trouble. The other waiter, Sandra, shrugged, glancing toward Trevor with caution. "You know how he is," she said. "He doesn't want anything messing up the vibe, especially not someone who looks like that." Aaron frowned, his brow furrowing. "Still, I don't think it's right." The kid wasn't asking for much. Sandra shot him a look, her voice dropping further. "You want to get fired? Because that's what's going to happen if Trevor hears you questioning him." Aaron sighed, his shoulders sagging. He didn't agree with what had just happened, but he knew better than to push back. Trevor wasn't just a manager, he was the kind of boss who thrived on control, and anyone who threatened that control didn't last long. Meanwhile, at table 3 near the window, an older couple whispered to each other. The woman, dressed in an elegant black dress, shook her head in disapproval. "That poor boy," she murmured. "He didn't deserve to be treated like that." Her husband, a stern man in a tailored suit, adjusted his glasses. "It's not our place to interfere," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He glanced toward the door where the boy had stood, his expression clouded. "But I admit it was uncomfortable to watch." Across the room, a younger couple sat silently, their eyes darting toward Trevor. The man, dressed casually in a blazer, leaned toward his companion. "Did you see how smug he looked? Like kicking the kid out was some kind of power trip." The woman nodded, her jaw tight. "I hate people like that," she muttered. "Think they're better than everyone just because they have a little authority." Trevor, oblivious to the undercurrent of discontent spreading through the room, continued his patrol. To him, the incident was over. He had done what was necessary to maintain the marina's image, and that was all that mattered. Rules were rules, and he was their enforcer. As Trevor passed by the bar, the bartender, Leo, raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, boss?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. "Fine," Trevor replied curtly. "Why wouldn't it be?" Leo shrugged, polishing a glass. "No reason. Just noticed some chatter after that thing with the kid." Trevor's jaw tightened. "It's not a thing," he said sharply. "He didn't belong here and I handled it." End of story. Leo held up his hands in mock surrender, his expression unreadable. "Got it, boss. Just saying people noticed." Trevor ignored him, his focus shifting as the front door swung open again. For a moment, his chest tightened, thinking the boy had returned. But instead, it was a trio of elegantly dressed guests, their laughter ringing out as they stepped inside. Trevor exhaled, relief washing over him. "Welcome to the marina," he said smoothly, slipping back into his polished, professional demeanor. "Do you have a reservation?" As Trevor escorted the guests to their table, he felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was what he thrived on: order, control, the ability to curate the perfect dining experience for the right kind of clientele. The boy from earlier was already fading from his mind, reduced to a minor disruption in an otherwise flawless evening. But outside, the boy wasn't fading. He was pacing just beyond the glow of the restaurant's grand entrance, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was quiet, his words measured, but there was a resolve in his tone that hadn't been there before. "They didn't even give me a chance," he said, glancing back toward the glowing sign that read the marina. "It was like I didn't even exist to them." The voice on the other end of the line spoke softly, offering words of encouragement. The boy nodded, his grip on the phone tightening. "Yeah," he said, "you're right. It's time." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on the restaurant. His fingers brushed the strap of his backpack, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and walked toward a sleek black car parked just down the street. Inside the restaurant, Trevor was making his rounds again, checking in with the tables to ensure everything was running smoothly. At one table, a guest flagged him down. "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone polite but firm. "I couldn't help but notice the incident earlier. That boy you turned away, was he causing trouble?" Trevor stiffened slightly, his smile tightening. "Not at all," he said smoothly. "But this is a fine dining establishment, and we have standards to uphold." "He didn't meet them." The woman raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "He looked like he just needed a meal," she said. "Do your standards not include compassion?" Trevor's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Compassion is important, of course," he said quickly. "But so is maintaining the atmosphere our guests expect. I'm sure you understand." The woman didn't reply, her gaze lingering on Trevor for a moment longer before she turned back to her meal. Trevor walked away, his shoulders tense. He could feel the judgment in her stare, and it irritated him more than he cared to admit. In the kitchen, the staff exchanged uneasy glances. Word of the incident had spread quickly, and though no one dared to confront Trevor directly, the tension was palpable. Aaron, the waiter who had spoken up earlier, muttered under his breath as he plated a dish. "Standards, my ass," he said. "He just likes throwing his weight around." "Careful," Sandra warned, her voice low. "You know how he is." Aaron scowled but said nothing more. He couldn't shake the image of the boy, his face flushed with humiliation as he'd been turned away. It didn't sit right with him, but what could he do? Trevor was in charge, and challenging him meant risking his job. Outside, the boy sat in the back seat of the black car, his backpack resting on the seat beside him. The driver, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, sir?" the driver asked. The boy nodded, his expression calm but determined. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go. It's time to show them who I am." Inside the marina, the atmosphere seemed to have settled back into its usual rhythm, but there was an undercurrent of unease lingering just beneath the surface. Guests whispered to one another in hushed tones, glancing occasionally toward Trevor as he made his rounds. The incident with the boy was still fresh in everyone's minds, and while the restaurant manager acted as if it was already forgotten, the rest of the room clearly hadn't. Trevor strode purposefully between tables, his clipboard tucked under one arm and a carefully constructed smile plastered across his face. At a glance, everything appeared to be running smoothly. Guests were eating, waiters were working, and the bistro's impeccable reputation remained intact. And yet, Trevor couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Manager Daniels, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Trevor turned sharply, his professional mask firmly in place as he faced the speaker. A woman in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer, stood near the bar. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was anything but amused. "Yes, ma'am," Trevor said smoothly, stepping closer. "How can I assist you?" "I couldn't help but notice how you handled that boy earlier," the woman began, her tone clipped. "Do you often turn away paying customers? Or was that a special occasion?" Trevor's smile tightened, but he didn't falter. "This establishment has a certain standard, ma'am," he replied evenly. "We cater to a specific clientele, and we maintain an atmosphere of sophistication and exclusivity." The woman raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Sophistication and exclusivity?" she echoed. "Is that your way of saying you don't serve people who look like they might actually need a meal?" A faint murmur rippled through the nearby tables as her words carried just far enough to be overheard. Trevor's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone neutral. "I'm sorry if my actions offended you," he said, "but I stand by my decision. We have a reputation to uphold, and that includes ensuring a comfortable environment for all of our guests." The woman scoffed, shaking her head. "Comfortable for whom, exactly?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you care more about appearances than people." The murmur grew louder now, drawing the attention of more diners. Trevor's face flushed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Ma'am, if there's a specific issue with your experience here, I'd be happy to address it," he said. "Otherwise, I must ask you to keep your voice down. We wouldn't want to disrupt the other guests." "Don't worry, I'm done talking," the woman said sharply. "But don't think for a second that I'm the only one who noticed. People like you are the reason places like this get a bad name." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Trevor standing there with his fists clenched at his sides. He could feel the weight of the room's attention pressing down on him, but he refused to let it show. Straightening his tie, he strode back toward the hostess stand, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything okay, boss?" One of the waiters, Aaron, asked hesitantly as Trevor passed. "Fine," Trevor snapped without breaking stride. "Get back to work." Aaron exchanged a glance with Sandra, who raised her eyebrows but said nothing. They both knew better than to push Trevor when he was in a mood like this, but the tension in the room was hard to ignore. At table 9, a young couple whispered to each other, their gazes darting between Trevor and the door. "I can't believe he kicked that kid out," the woman said, her voice low but insistent. "He wasn't doing anything wrong." "Yeah," her partner agreed, his tone laced with discomfort. "Makes you wonder what else they turn a blind eye to around here." Other guests seemed to share their sentiment, though no one was brave enough to voice it openly. Instead, the energy in the room shifted, the once bustling restaurant now tinged with unease. Trevor felt it, but he refused to acknowledge it. As far as he was concerned, he had done his job, and that was the end of it. Outside, the boy stood near the black car, his posture straighter now than it had been earlier. He had taken off his backpack, resting it on the hood of the vehicle, and was speaking softly into his phone. "They don't think I belong," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "But that's about to change." The person on the other end of the line spoke briefly, their words inaudible, but the boy nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." He ended the call and stepped back from the car, his eyes scanning the glowing restaurant sign as if sizing it up. Then, without another word, he adjusted the strap of his backpack and began walking back toward the entrance. Inside, Trevor was reviewing the evening's reservations when the front door swung open. He looked up instinctively, and his breath caught in his throat. It was the boy. Trevor's expression darkened as the boy stepped inside, his posture confident and his gaze unwavering. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath, all eyes turning toward the entrance as the tension crackled like static electricity. "You've got to be kidding me," Trevor muttered under his breath, setting his clipboard down and stepping forward. The boy met Trevor's gaze, his expression calm but unyielding. "I believe I have every right to be here," he said simply. Trevor's lips thinned, his voice low and clipped. "We've already been through this," he said. "You don't belong here. Now leave before I call security." The boy didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up for Trevor to see. "Go ahead," he said evenly. "But I'd suggest you think carefully before you do." Trevor frowned, glancing at the screen. A series of numbers flashed across it, a direct line to someone Trevor didn't recognize. But there was something about the boy's calm confidence that gave him pause. "You think a phone number is going to change anything?" Trevor asked, his voice dripping with disdain. The boy tilted his head slightly, his smile widening just a fraction. "Not just any number," he said. "It's the one person who's about to make your night very interesting." Trevor stared at the boy, his frustration boiling just beneath the surface. He didn't know what game this kid was playing, but he wasn't about to let him disrupt the restaurant any further. Gesturing toward one of the waiters, he barked, "Call security. Now!" As the waiter scurried off, the boy didn't move. He stood there, calm and unshaken, as if he knew something Trevor didn't. And as the seconds ticked by, the unease in the room grew thicker, wrapping around the restaurant like a fog. Trevor's jaw clenched as he watched the boy stand his ground. The audacity, the nerve, it was enough to make his blood boil. He was used to being obeyed, to his word being final. But this kid wasn't budging. And worse, he had the gall to challenge Trevor in front of the entire restaurant. "Excuse me," Trevor snapped, stepping closer to the boy, his voice low and menacing. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you're done. I've called security and they'll deal with you." The boy didn't flinch. Instead, he glanced around the room, his gaze sweeping over the diners who were now openly watching the scene unfold. Their curiosity was palpable, their murmurs growing louder with each passing second. He tilted his head slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm not playing any games," the boy said calmly, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "I'm here for what I deserve." "What you deserve?" Trevor repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You deserve nothing. You don't belong here, and I'm done wasting my time with you." A sharp laugh escaped from a table nearby, drawing Trevor's attention. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit smirked as he leaned toward his companion. "This is better than the opera," he murmured, loud enough for Trevor to hear. The woman beside him stifled a chuckle behind her napkin. Trevor's face flushed red as the humiliation began to creep in. He shot a glare at the man but quickly turned back to the boy, determined to end this once and for all. "I'm giving you one last chance," he hissed. "Walk out that door, or I'll make sure you regret staying." "I don't think you'll do that," the boy replied, his voice as calm as ever. "Because the moment you do, you'll regret it more." Trevor's patience snapped. He grabbed the boy's arm, his grip firm but not yet forceful. "I've had enough of this nonsense," he growled. "You're leaving. Now." The boy didn't resist, his expression remaining steady. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, but there was something in his tone, something almost triumphant, that gave Trevor pause. For a split second, doubt flickered in his mind, but his anger quickly drowned it out. Behind them, the murmurs grew louder. Guests whispered to each other, speculating about the boy's identity and why he seemed so confident. Phones were discreetly raised, cameras capturing every moment of the escalating confrontation. This wasn't just a minor incident anymore. It was becoming a spectacle. "Do you see this?" A woman at a nearby table whispered to her partner, gesturing toward Trevor and the boy. "This manager is completely out of line." "I don't know," her companion replied, though his tone was unsure. "The kid does seem like he's pushing his luck." "Pushing his luck?" the woman shot back. "He just wants to be treated like a human being. That manager is on some power trip." Trevor could feel the weight of their words, the whispers surrounding him like a swarm of bees. He tried to block them out, to focus on maintaining control. But it was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Just as Trevor was about to haul the boy toward the door, The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the restaurant. Mike, the head of security, arrived, his burly frame and no-nonsense demeanor immediately commanding attention. He glanced between Trevor and the boy, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on here?" Mike asked, his voice deep and authoritative. Finally, Trevor said, releasing the boy's arm and stepping back. "This kid is causing a disturbance. I've asked him to leave, but he's refusing. Get him out of here." Mike turned to the boy, his expression softening slightly. "Son, is this true?" he asked, his tone gentler than Trevor's. "What's going on?" The boy met Mike's gaze, his eyes calm but piercing. "I'm not causing a disturbance," he said. "I came here for a reason, and I haven't broken any rules. He's the one who grabbed me." Mike's eyes flicked to Trevor, whose face twisted in indignation. "Don't listen to him," Trevor snapped. "He's just trying to shift the blame. He's been nothing but trouble since he walked in." "I haven't raised my voice," the boy said, his tone measured. "I haven't threatened anyone. I just stood here. If that's causing trouble, then maybe the problem isn't me." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, no one spoke. Mike glanced around the room, taking in the diner's expressions. Some curious, some disapproving, but most quietly siding with the boy. The murmurs grew louder, their collective weight pressing against Trevor like a tide. "Look," Mike said finally, addressing the boy, "I get it, but if the manager wants you to leave, I can't let you stay. That's just how it works." "And if I leave?" the boy asked, tilting his head slightly. "Does that mean you're okay with how he's treated me? With how he treats people like me?" Mike hesitated, his expression conflicted. "It's not about that," he said carefully. "It's about keeping the peace." "The peace?" the boy repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You think there's peace here? Take a look around. No one's comfortable, and it's not because of me." Mike's gaze shifted, taking in the diners who were now openly watching the scene. Their expressions ranged from disapproval to quiet outrage, their whispers growing louder with every passing second. Trevor could feel the tension building, the room slipping further and further out of his control. "Enough of this," Trevor snapped, stepping forward. "Mike, do your job and remove him." Mike hesitated, his posture rigid as he glanced between Trevor and the boy. "I don't know, boss," he said slowly. "Maybe we should call someone higher up. This doesn't feel right." Trevor's eyes narrowed, his face flushing with anger. "Are you questioning my authority?" he demanded. "I gave you an order. Now follow it." Mike's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "Let's go, kid." The boy didn't move. He stood there, calm and steady, his eyes locked on Trevor. "You still don't understand what you're doing," he said quietly. "But you will." Trevor scoffed, gesturing toward the door. "Get him out of here. I'm done wasting my time." Mike placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, gently guiding him toward the exit. The diners watched in stunned silence, their whispers giving way to a heavy tension that filled the room like a storm cloud. As the boy reached the door, he paused, glancing back at Trevor one last time. His eyes held a quiet confidence, a certainty that sent a chill down Trevor's spine. "You're going to regret this," the boy said simply. Then he walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. The restaurant fell silent, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air. Trevor stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving with frustration. Trevor tried to shake off the boy's parting words, but they clung to him like smoke, their weight settling deep into his chest. The quiet confidence in the boy's tone had rattled him, though he refused to admit it. Instead, he returned to his post at the hostess stand, his movements brisk and sharp, as if sheer busyness could erase the tension. Guests whispered among themselves, their eyes darting toward Trevor whenever he passed by. Some were on their phones, typing furiously, while others openly stared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. Trevor could feel their judgment, but he told himself it didn't matter. He had done what needed to be done. The boy was gone, and that was the end of it, or so he thought. Just as Trevor was beginning to regain his composure, The sound of the front door swinging open drew everyone's attention. He glanced up, his jaw tightening as he saw a tall man in a sleek black suit step into the restaurant. The man's presence was commanding, his movements deliberate and precise. He carried an air of authority that immediately silenced the room. Behind him, two more individuals entered, a woman in a tailored blazer and another man holding a leather portfolio. They exuded the same sense of purpose, their gazes scanning the room before locking onto Trevor. Trevor straightened his tie, a flicker of annoyance flashing across his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped. The man in the suit didn't reply immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stopped a few feet from Trevor, his piercing gaze fixed on the manager. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. "We need to talk." Trevor frowned, his irritation growing. "If you're here about a reservation, you'll need to speak with the hostess," he said, gesturing toward the podium. "I'm very busy." The man raised an eyebrow, his expression unamused. "This isn't about a reservation," he said. "It's about your behavior." Trevor's stomach tightened, though he kept his expression neutral. "My behavior?" he repeated, forcing a chuckle. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." The man didn't react to Trevor's attempt at humor. Instead, he motioned to the leather portfolio, which the second man quickly opened. He pulled out a document and handed it to Trevor, who accepted it with a frown. "What is this?" Trevor muttered, his eyes scanning the page. As he read, his face paled, the color draining from his cheeks. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up at the man in the suit, his voice faltering. What is this supposed to mean?" "It means you've made a serious mistake," the man replied evenly. "The boy you just escorted out? He's not just any kid. He has connections you clearly underestimated." Trevor's heart pounded in his chest as he processed the words. "Connections?" he stammered. "What kind of connections?" The man's gaze hardened. "The kind that could make your life very difficult," he said. "But for now, we're here to discuss your conduct and the reputation of this establishment." Trevor opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. His mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. Who were these people? And why were they so concerned about the boy? The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder, the guests clearly enthralled by the unfolding drama. Some had their phones out, recording the interaction, while others leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Excuse me," a voice interjected, cutting through the tension. It was Mike, the head of security, who had been watching from a distance. He approached cautiously, his gaze shifting between Trevor and the newcomers. "What's going on here?" The man in the suit turned to Mike, his expression softening slightly. "We're here to address a complaint," he said. "One that involves the actions of your manager." Mike's brow furrowed as he glanced at Trevor. "A complaint?" he repeated. "What kind of complaint?" Before the man could respond, the door swung open again, and this time it was the boy who entered. His posture was straighter than before, his gaze steady and unwavering. The crowd gasped audibly, their attention snapping to him as he walked toward the group at the front of the room. Trevor's face twisted in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. The boy stopped a few feet away, his eyes locking onto Trevor's. "I told you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "You were making a mistake." Trevor's hands curled into fists at his sides. "What are you trying to pull?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You've already been removed from the premises. You have no right to be here." The man in the suit held up a hand, silencing Trevor. "He has every right," he said firmly. "More than you, actually." The crowd erupted into whispers, their curiosity reaching a fever pitch. Trevor's head spun as he struggled to maintain control of the situation. He couldn't afford to lose his composure now, not in front of the entire restaurant. "Listen," Trevor said, his voice straining to sound authoritative. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is my restaurant. I'm the manager here, and I make the rules. The man in the suit exchanged a glance with the boy, who gave a small nod. Then, with a calm smile, the man turned back to Trevor. "Not for long," he said simply. The cryptic remark sent a ripple of unease through the room, the weight of its implication hanging heavy in the air. Trevor's confidence faltered, his mind racing as he tried to decipher the meaning behind the words. "I don't have time for this," he snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police." "You're welcome to try," the man replied, his tone calm but laced with quiet authority. "But I'd suggest you think carefully before you do." Trevor froze, the weight of the man's words pressing down on him like a physical force. The room seemed to close in around him, the whispers of the crowd growing louder and more pointed. He could feel their judgment, their eyes boring into him, and for the first time he felt a flicker of doubt. As the tension reached its breaking point, the boy stepped forward, his gaze steady and unyielding. "You wanted me gone because you thought I didn't belong," he said. "But you're about to find out just how wrong you were." Trevor stared at the boy, his chest heaving as the weight of the moment bore down on him. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever it was, he wasn't ready for it. "You're about to find out why this wasn't just a mistake," the boy said, his voice calm but cutting. He reached into the side pocket of his backpack, pulling out a sleek leather folder. The gold embossing on the cover glinted under the soft lights. The Marina Holdings. Trevor's stomach sank, but he forced a dismissive laugh. "What's that supposed to mean?" he sneered, though his voice wavered. "You think waving around some folder is going to change anything?" "It's not just a folder," the boy replied evenly. "It's proof." "Proof of what?" Trevor snapped, though his chest tightened with a dread he couldn't suppress. The boy handed the folder to the man in the suit, who opened it with practiced ease. He extracted a thick stack of documents, holding them up for everyone to see. "Proof," the man said, his voice commanding, "that this young man isn't just anyone. His name is Ethan Beaumont, and as of 2 months ago, he became the majority shareholder of this establishment." The words hit Trevor like a freight train. His jaw dropped, his face draining of all color as a gasp rippled through the restaurant. Diners exchanged wide-eyed glances, their murmurs erupting like a wave. Phones whipped out, cameras capturing every second of the unfolding spectacle. "That's impossible," Trevor stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's just a kid who inherited his family's multimillion-dollar hospitality empire," the man in the suit corrected, his tone sharp. "And a kid who now owns the very restaurant you've been managing." Trevor stumbled back a step, his legs wobbling as he struggled to process the revelation. "There's no way," he muttered. "This has to be some kind of joke." "It's no joke," Ethan said, his gaze piercing. "I've been the silent owner of the marina for weeks, and tonight, I decided to see how my staff treats people when they think no one's watching." Trevor's chest heaved as he looked between Ethan and the man in the suit, his mind racing. He wanted to deny it, to push back, but the weight of the documents in the man's hand left no room for doubt. This wasn't just some brat trying to make a scene. This was the truth. "You're lying," Trevor said weakly, though his voice lacked conviction. Why would someone like you? Why would I come here looking like this?" Ethan finished for him. "Because I wanted to see how you treat someone who didn't fit your idea of what belongs in a place like this. And you didn't disappoint." The crowd erupted into whispers again, their voices buzzing with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Some diners smirked, clearly reveling in Trevor's humiliation, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Trevor's face burned as the weight of their judgment pressed down on him. He looked desperately at Mike, the head of security, hoping for support, but even Mike seemed stunned into silence. "Ethan," Trevor said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Look, I didn't know who you were. If I had—" "Exactly," Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting like a knife. "You didn't know, and that's the problem. You saw someone you thought didn't belong, and you decided they weren't worth your time or respect." Trevor flinched at the words, his fists tightening at his sides. "I was just doing my job," he said weakly. I was protecting the restaurant's reputation. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. And what reputation is that? He asked. One where people are judged and dismissed based on how they look. One where someone can't even ask for a meal without being treated like a nuisance. Trevor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He felt the room closing in around him, the weight of the stares and whispers suffocating him. I trusted you to run this place with integrity, Ethan continued, his tone unyielding. But tonight you showed me exactly who you are, and I'm not impressed. The man in the suit stepped forward, his expression stern. As Ethan's legal advisor, I'll be overseeing the disciplinary actions resulting from tonight's incident, he said. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties as manager. Trevor's knees buckled, and he grabbed the edge of the hostess stand for support. You can't do this, he said weakly, his voice barely audible. I've been here for years. I built this place. No, Ethan said firmly. You built a place where people like you feel comfortable mistreating others. That's not the kind of business I want to run. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, the diners openly celebrating Trevor's downfall. Phones captured his stunned expression. The humiliation etched across his face as he realized there was no escape. Mike stepped forward hesitantly, his voice low. Trevor, he said, his tone almost apologetic. I think it's time for you to leave. Trevor turned to Mike, his face twisted with desperation. You're seriously going along with this? He demanded. After everything I've done for this place? Mike hesitated, then shrugged. You heard him, he said simply. He owns the place now. Trevor's chest heaved as he looked around the room, his gaze landing on the smirking faces of the diners and the judgmental stares of his staff. He wanted to lash out, to argue, to fight, but deep down he knew it was over. You'll regret this, he spat, his voice trembling with anger and humiliation. You'll all regret this. Ethan didn't flinch. The only regret here is how long it took me to see what kind of person you really are, he said. Now leave. Trevor stared at him for a moment longer, his face a mixture of fury and despair. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the restaurant, the door slamming shut behind him. Inside, the crowd erupted into cheers, the tension finally breaking as the diners celebrated Ethan's victory. He stood there, his posture calm but resolute, as he turned to the staff. This isn't just about tonight, he said, his voice carrying through the room. It's about creating a place where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are. And that starts now. The staff exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of relief and hope. For the first time that night, the atmosphere began to lighten, the heavy tension giving way to something brighter. Ethan turned back to the man in the suit, nodding slightly. Let's get to work, he said. Outside the restaurant, Trevor stormed down the sidewalk, his breath coming in heavy, ragged bursts. The cool night air did little to calm the storm of anger and humiliation raging within him. His fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms, but he barely noticed. The applause and cheers from inside the marina echoed in his ears, a cruel soundtrack to his public disgrace. Ungrateful little brat, Trevor muttered under his breath, his voice trembling with fury. Who does he think he is? Just because he's got money doesn't mean he can humiliate me like this. As he paced near the street, the reality of his situation began to sink in. Years of dedication to the restaurant, his tireless work to maintain its exclusivity and reputation. All of it had been erased in an instant. And for what? A kid with a vendetta and a chip on his shoulder? Trevor couldn't accept it. He wouldn't accept it. But as he fumbled for his phone to call someone, anyone, who could help him, a notification caught his eye. His name was trending, curiosity mixed with dread as he opened the app. The top posts were videos from inside the restaurant, showing his confrontation with Ethan in all its humiliating glory. The captions were brutal. The comments were even worse. People from all over the internet chimed in with their opinions, shredding Trevor's character and calling for boycotts of any business he ever touched. This guy's everything wrong with elitism, one comment read. Imagine thinking you're better than someone and then finding out they own you. Chef's kiss, said another. Trevor's hands trembled as he scrolled, his anger giving way to panic. He wasn't just dealing with humiliation anymore. This was a full-blown public relations disaster. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. Back inside the marina, Ethan stood at the center of the restaurant, addressing the staff and guests. His calm demeanor and articulate words carried a weight that silenced the room. Tonight wasn't just about one person's bad judgment, Ethan said, his voice steady. It was about exposing the kind of systemic issues that allow people like Trevor to thrive. For too long, we've let bias, elitism, and prejudice dictate who gets treated with respect. That ends now. Sandra, one of the waiters, exchanged a glance with Aaron. He's right, she whispered. Trevor's been like this for years. It's about time someone called him out. Aaron nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, he said. And who better than the guy who actually owns the place? Ethan turned his attention to the staff, his expression softening slightly. I'm not here to scare anyone or make people feel uncertain about their jobs, he said. But I am here to set a new standard. This restaurant isn't just for the elite. It's for everyone. And if you can't get behind that, then maybe this isn't the place for you. The staff murmured among themselves, their faces a mixture of relief and resolve. It was clear that Ethan's message had struck a chord. Meanwhile, Trevor's problems were multiplying. As he stood on the sidewalk, furiously typing out a statement to try and salvage his reputation, his phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line made his heart sink. Immediate termination of employment contract. Trevor opened the email, his chest tightening with every word. The message was short and brutally clear. Due to his behavior and the public fallout, his contract with the Marina Holdings had been terminated, effective immediately. There was no room for negotiation, no chance to explain himself. It was over. Trevor's breath hitched as he read the final line. Please note that this termination extends to any affiliated establishments under our ownership. He felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He wasn't just losing his position at the marina. He was being blacklisted from an entire network of high-end restaurants. He stumbled back, leaning against a lamppost for support. Around him, passersby glanced at him curiously, some whispering as they recognized his face from the trending videos. Trevor felt exposed, like an animal in a cage, and the realization was suffocating. A voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. Mr. Daniels? Trevor looked up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the man in the suit from earlier. The man approached calmly, his expression unreadable. I thought you'd like to know, he said, his tone polite but firm, that Mr. Beaumont has also decided to press charges for harassment. You'll be hearing from our legal team. Trevor's mouth fell open, his face contorting with disbelief. Charges, he sputtered. This is ridiculous. He's doing this just to ruin me. No, the man said simply. He's doing this to hold you accountable. Something it seems you're not accustomed to. Without waiting for a response, the man turned and walked away, leaving Trevor standing there in stunned silence. His phone buzzed again, another notification popping up. An article from a local news outlet, complete with his photo and the headline. Manager removed after public confrontation with restaurant owner. Trevor stared at the screen, his hands trembling. His entire world was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Back in the restaurant, Ethan stood by the hostess stand, greeting guests as they came in. The mood inside the marina had shifted entirely. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable evening had transformed into a celebration of accountability and change. One of the diners approached Ethan, extending a hand. Thank you, the man said earnestly. What you did tonight, it's the kind of stand more people need to take. Respect shouldn't be reserved for the privileged few. Ethan shook his hand, offering a small smile. It's not about making a stand, he said. It's about doing what's right, and making sure this place reflects the values we should all live by. As the applause echoed through the restaurant once more, Trevor sat on a bench outside, his face buried in his hands. He was no longer the manager of the marina. He was no longer anything, really, and for the first time, he realized that his power, his authority, his very sense of self, had always been built on a fragile foundation of arrogance and prejudice. Inside the marina, the atmosphere was vibrant once more, the tension of the earlier conflict replaced with warmth and celebration. Ethan stood at the center of it all, addressing the staff and guests one final time. "This isn't just about one person's mistakes," he said, his voice steady and reflective. "It's about the culture we create, the choices we make every day about how we treat people. Respect shouldn't be conditional. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter where they come from or how they look." Applause erupted, the staff and diners visibly moved by his words. As the evening wound down, Ethan stepped outside, the cool night air washing over him. He glanced at the restaurant, now bustling with life, and smiled faintly. A passerby paused, looking at him curiously. "Isn't it amazing?" Ethan said softly. "How much better the world could be if we judged less and listened more?" The passerby nodded, thoughtful, as Ethan's words lingered in the air. And with that, Ethan walked away, leaving a question for all to ponder. What kind of world do we want to build, one of division or one of understanding?